of pediatric issues. The first thing, as you might see, we are going to record this session because many people have asked us they can't attend today. If there is personal information that you would like to ask questions about but don't want to be recorded, we can at the end stop the recording and you can ask that question if you prefer. You can ask questions throughout the presentation. You can use the chat area, and I will be monitoring that and can ask our speaker about that, or you can wait until the end. So I'd like to get started, and it's a real pleasure for me to introduce Meg Taylor. Ms. Taylor is a coach and a consultant with an organization called Spark ADHD, which she has founded herself and is the main principal provider of services for adults and children who have ADHD. She's also the founder of a wonderful group called Valley ADHD, which helps both adults and pediatric patients, pediatric people with ADHD, and they run a support group. I think it's now every Tuesday, the first Tuesday of every month. It's on Zoom, and it's a wonderful group. Anybody is welcome to join. There's no fee for this support group. And it's people helping each other with different issues related to ADHD. And Meg, and usually one of our behavioral health providers at Northampton Area Pediatrics, also is involved. Meg has a master's in secondary education and is also working towards and almost completing a master's in mental health counseling. And she is a certified ADHD coach. She has been in the Valley for many years and helping many of our patients at NAP and throughout the community with these issues. And she has a wonderful presentation today to help us understand how we can help our patients and children who have ADHD and help them deal with the issues that ADHD brings and do it in a happy and a successful way. So I'm looking forward to hearing, Meg, how you do this. Thanks for joining us.
Great. Well, thank you for that generous introduction. Yeah, it's great to see so many people. I can't see the chat or the number of folks here, but it looks like there's, I don't know, 15, 20 people or so. Can you tell? Oh, I think you're muted, Dr. Schwab.
We do have 25 now.
25, okay. All right, well, we're gonna get started here, and I'm hoping that this workshop can be interactive. I think that's gonna be the most useful for you all. So if you could put it in the chat, and this is gonna be more for you all to see, but the ages of your children, and maybe just a little bit about why you're here today, what you hope to get from this. And then when at the very end of the presentation, if we miss a question somewhere along the way, we can come back and go over what folks hope to gain from this workshop, and then I can answer any questions or give you resources or point you on your way at the end. Okay. Let's see. Give me 1 second here. I'm not seeing the no. Let's see. I'm just trying to move the next screen. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So this is what we're going to be looking at today. Can everybody see this all right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. So we're gonna cover a lot. There's a lot of information. This topic around executive functions and how to support your children or your teenager at home. First of all, we're covering about ages 1 to probably 25. So we've got a big, huge age range as far as children go. And executive functions, there's so much that we've learned about them in the last 30 years. And we're always learning new ways to work with kids and work with teenagers on developing these skills. And then the other piece of this is that everyone's situation is a little bit different. Every family is different. Every child is different. And so your needs are going to be different. And then we'll talk about some of the other factors that come into play as well. So there's a lot of information here. Please ask questions. And Dr. Schwab, since I can't see the questions, feel free to just interrupt and jump in with those.
Will do.
So this is a basic overlay. We're going to talk about signs of executive function delays. What might bring you to not just this workshop, but make you question what's going on for your child, and maybe an educator has brought up concerns. And then we're going to talk about the impacts that these delays or deficits or weaknesses, however you want to call them, the impacts of those on the child, the individual child, the impacts on families. And then we'll also talk about caregiver responses, the typical responses to these delays. And that's kind of a fascinating piece of my own research that I've done a little bit on. And then we'll get into the executive functions. I'm going to cover 11, depending on who you ask. Some people will say there's 5, some will say 7, 9, 11. I think Peg Dawson is now saying 12. So, but I'm gonna go through 11. Then we're going to talk about assessment of executive function weaknesses, and then we'll talk about kind of strategies and tools for home, and just some kind of takeaways or tips for parents with helping their kids develop these skills. Okay. Oops. Okay. All right, so I'm going to read through each of these, and as I'm reading through each one, I want you to think about one of your children, the child who's kind of having the most struggles at home right now. We're not concerned about school in this workshop. I really tried to focus what we're going to talk about to be home, because there's an army of educators that work with your kids at school, but today we're focused on you and your relationship and your child at home. So think about which of your children is struggling the most right now at home. And then as I read over these behaviors, if it sounds familiar, you might want to, on a piece of paper or the notes app on your phone, just jot it down, okay? And then what we'll do with that is towards the end, you can start, you'll be able to start making a plan for that child and for that particular deficit or delay. And I'll walk you through how to do that, okay? All right, so these are all signs of executive function delays. I like to say the word delay. You're going to hear me interchange delay, deficit, weakness, challenge. I don't like the word deficit because it makes it sound like it's permanent. So I like the word delay because all of these skills can be taught. They can be taught, they can be practiced. They will develop if you do absolutely nothing at all, they will develop. Maybe not as quickly or as optimally as you would like, but there's natural development that happens, and we'll talk about that in a few slides. All right, so interrupting others, acting without thinking. You get bonus points if you can name that executive function as I read through these. The next one, loses belongings, forgets chores, forgets assignments. Okay, these are the kids that, mom or dad is driving to school with their iPads, or not their iPads, their Chromebooks, because they forgot it. The next one is easily frustrated or annoyed or emotionally distracted. Okay, their emotions are just overwhelming them, getting in the way, interfering with their ability to focus. The next one's easily distracted. Now, there's a difference here. Easily distracted, but not emotionally distracted. So easily distracted, the differentiation would be by anything. It could be a pet that walks in the room. It could be the beeping of their phone. It could be anything, okay? But it's not necessarily internal emotions. So easily distracted, problems finishing a task to completion. They do half of their laundry and then they forget to do the rest, or they stop in the middle of their homework and wander off, that kind of thing. The next one is putting off homework or other tasks. They need a lot of reminders. Okay. And then after that is getting overwhelmed by large projects. Really have a hard time prioritizing, following step-by-step, projects. They just don't know how to break it down into smaller steps. It's very overwhelming for them. And these could be, cleaning projects. These could be cooking a meal. It could be, washing their bike. It could be anything. Disorganized binder, backpack, bedroom, closet, files on their Chromebook. You go in and you see there's 4,000 emails that haven't been organized. For a teenager. The next one is, getting ready for school, getting ready for bedtime, getting ready to do their homework. They just don't manage their time well. They really struggle with this. And, as a result, might be late for school, late to birthday parties, late to sports. And then the next one is difficulty with a change in plans or open-ended requests. There was, I think the workshop last month was around this topic, around transitions and difficulty with changes. And then we have does not check their work, doesn't evaluate, doesn't reflect. Kids who they might do a behavior, there's clearly a consequence, maybe even a social consequence, and then a month later or 3 weeks later, they're doing the same exact behavior, and you wonder, didn't they learn from that? And so there's kind of like a deficit in reflection or self-evaluation. And then the last one is puts fun before work. We see this a lot with adolescents, especially wanting to do things that are fun or enjoyable before doing the things that will get them to that longer term goal. Okay, so I'm guessing if you're here tonight that probably at least 1 to 3 or 4 of these are familiar to you with your own children. Maybe you can check 9 of them off for your child. If your child's an adolescent, you'll be able to check more than if they are, well, actually, I'll explain why developmentally how it's a little bit different, but some of these you may not have encountered yet, is what I'm trying to say. So if your child is an adolescent, you've probably seen all of these, but if they are, 12 or under, you're probably focused on 5 or 6 of these, which are more foundational skills. Okay, so here are some of the impacts on individuals, whether they're children, adults, but we're focused on children. So it's very stressful to have these delays because kids are constantly being assessed on these skills, whether it's indirectly or directly. It's frustrating to know that your peers can do these things and you can't. Sometimes it'll come out as anger or blame. My teacher didn't show me how, or my teacher never explained that, or this is your fault. You didn't, you didn't do my laundry, and you should be the one doing it, or you never taught me. Sometimes that's kind of more the externalizing behavior that can be a result. The internalizing, the shame, embarrassment, or masking. And masking is a term that we probably hear a little bit more with the autism community, where they have to kind of put on this neurotypical mask. But kids with ADHD or executive function deficits, they have to do the same. Sometimes they can blend in a little bit better, but it's incredibly exhausting, incredibly taxing. And that's why sometimes you'll see these kids come home after school and they just collapse at after school collapse, because they've been trying to mask and hide how difficult it is for them to do these things, or they try and hide the fact that they they don't actually have the skills, or they're depending on other people, or they're taking shortcuts. So after a while, after several years into elementary or middle or high school, you can see kind of the sense of like reduced self-efficacy. Kids feeling like I'll never, I'm hopeless, I'll never get it. I'm dumb, I'm incapable. I need my resource room teacher to do this for me. I can't do this on my own. And then that, of course, can create alienation from peers, sometimes from family members, if family members mistakenly believe that they're being lazy, or they're unmotivated, or they're forgetful. Those are all words that describe the behavior, but there's with these kids, there's no intention behind it. It's not that they're trying to be unmotivated, or they're trying to forget, or they're trying to be distracted. This is part of their neurobiology. And then if the skills are not supported, this is when you see middle and high school academic performance is impacted. They can disengage from school. They no longer identify as a student or someone who's capable of doing academics, or and unfortunately, if the deficits or delays are not noticed by anyone or assessed, evaluated, and the kids fall through the gaps, which happens all the time, especially if they're masking well, then they fall further behind, and it kind of builds on itself. And then you kind of have these internalized or externalizing behaviors. So, if they don't want to talk about it and they're feeling really embarrassed, you might see anxiety, depression develop. And then if they're frustrated and angry, you might see these conduct disorders or oppositional defiant disorder develop. These are kind of like worst case scenario, but it happens. And then if it's really not attended to, you might see unhealthy ways of coping, like substance use, or self-harm, or some other behaviors, kind of maybe even finding peer groups that are similar to them in their lack of self-efficacy. And so, not identifying with academic success, but saying I'm part of this crowd now, which maybe they're all struggling in that crowd. Okay, so impacts on family. We know that children with ADHD, teens with ADHD, or parents with ADHD, we have enough research to show that the relationships are impaired with caregivers. There's high family conflict in most of these families. The chronic stress and caregiver burnout. We come to our monthly support group, and you'll see that or experience that in person. This is marathon parenting. So if you don't take care of yourself, you will probably get to a point where you're feeling burnt out, maybe even resentful. It's very tough to parent kids with deficits or delays like this, especially if the parents themselves struggle. Parents can feel isolated. It's one of the reasons I created, or approached NAP about creating the parent group, was the isolation that I personally was feeling as a parent of a child with ADHD. And the group's been fabulous at helping people to not feel that way, when we really know just how many of us are parenting kids with these differences. Marital and couple conflict. I can't remember the statistic, it was on my presenter notes, but very high percentage of families with kids with executive function delays end in divorce. It's pretty high. And then siblings, the sibling resentment, siblings worry. Sometimes they think it's contagious. You know, will I get ADHD? Will I get oppositional defiant disorder? So siblings can worry or be resentful of all the attention that their sibling is getting. Okay, if there's one slide in this whole presentation that I think is just so important in doing this work, it's to recognize that as parents of these children, we tend to sit somewhere along this spectrum. These are the common caregiver responses to having a child with executive function delays. And Maggie Sibley, University of Washington, she and her associates, they did a study where they looked at parents of kids with these delays, and they found that in their study, in their research in 2016, that 40% of the parents were on the left side of this diagram, the over-involved micromanagers. These are the personal assistants. Okay, we'll talk about each of these. On the right side of the spectrum, another 40% were the disengaged and uninvolved. And then there were about 20% that were these responsive collaborators. And, you know, if you're trying to transfer this slide to what your understanding of parenting patterns are, which you might be more familiar with, authoritative parenting, that would probably be this responsive collaborators, but it doesn't quite line up. And that's because of the unique nature of executive function delays and how that presents in a family. Okay, so the over-involved micromanagers, this is probably where you had to be when your child was young. Most even neurotypical children, their parents tend to be very highly involved when they're little, right? That makes sense. We're keeping them safe. We're feeding them. We're making sure they get fresh air and exercise, and we're managing all their appointments and all their play dates, et cetera. That's pretty normal up until age 6 or so, right? And then they go to school, and then if your child's neurotypical, you can start to let go and back away. Then in school, during the school years, elementary years, they would develop more independence. And then when they're in high school, you could separate even more, and your child, your teen is developing some autonomy and some independence. That's kind of like a normal trajectory. But what Dr. Sibley found with this study was that the over-involved micromanagers, some of these parents were doing their senior and high schools, writing their college application essays, doing their homework for them. Very high rates of parent anxiety, high rates of stress, high rates of burnout. These are parents that sometimes people call them, helicopter parents, but they're over-involved, they are highly anxious. I know probably some of you might fall into this category, or you did, because you would be interested in attending this workshop. At the right end, the disengaged, uninvolved, there's probably not too many of those parents here. Okay, so, and this is a spectrum, and these are the extremes. So on the right side, the disengaged, uninvolved parents, these are parents, they may have been a micromanager at some point, and they crashed and burned. They just couldn't do it anymore. It was too much. It was too frustrating. Maybe they didn't see much progress. Maybe there's high conflict in the family because of it. Maybe their children really pushed back on it. And these parents, or there's another kind of profile, and these are parents that are busy. They might have multiple jobs. They have their own problems. They might be stressed. They might be suffering from depression. They're preoccupied. they're disengaged, they're preoccupied, they have a lot going on. They might have another child with physical health needs or, substance abuse. And so all of their energy goes into that child. And in Maggie Sibley's study, these parents had high levels of depression. Okay, so you have anxiety on the left, depression on the right. In the middle, I don't think she called them responsive collaborators. That's my own term. I can't remember what she called them. But in the middle, the collaborative parents, these were parents with the best mental health and the best physical health. Actually, the micromanagers had physical health problems, ulcers and headaches and aches and pains. And the group in the middle, the parents in the middle, actually physically felt okay and had the healthiest relationships with their kids. But it's hard work because you have to let go, but you still have to kind of be involved. So it's that delicate balance. There's no shame and there's no blame in ADHD coaching or in the parent work that I do. So just take a moment to see where you sit. I can tell you right now, I was definitely on the left side when my son was younger, and I have evolved, I have changed. I don't think I could ever be on the right side, just my nature, but I think it's normal to be in that over-involved stage longer with kids with delays. Sometimes you do have to hover longer because maybe your child is impulsive and is getting into physical altercations on the playgrounds, and your child's 7 or 8 or 9, and so you still have to be involved. But the goal is to kind of hand over some of the skill practice to your child by being right there next to them, and gradually over time kind of pulling back and collaborating more with your child as opposed to doing everything for them. All right.
Meg,
so here,
can I
yes.
want to just mention
Yeah.
at least 2 people have mentioned as part of their goals today is trying to manage that. I think that, and one's a teenager and one's actually a student in college. The parents are asking, how do we manage that balance? So I think I think you reflected that you will get back to maybe some ideas on how they can do that, how they can help that.
Yeah. Are there questions how to pull away?
They want to leave. I think they would like to leave today with a better understanding of how they can, what's too much and what's not enough. I think that's what it is, and maybe people could mention in the chat if I got that right or not.
I'm just jotting this down. Those are such important questions, and yeah, it takes some time to figure that out. It takes some time to figure out what is too much, what is not enough. There's a little trial and error, but when we talk about assessments, that might clarify some things.
Okay, as we go along, think about I'll ask again or people will ask again if that's not as clear.
Yeah, definitely ask that again if I don't get to it. So here's some questions to think about. This I took from Maggie Sibley's work that she does, and she's a psychologist and does therapy for teenagers with executive function deficits and ADHD. And so these are the questions. Which caregiver response can you relate to, which I asked before. Why did this response start? Why did it start? Whether it's on the left side of over-involved or the right side of unengaged. Why has it not stopped? Why are you still providing support? Why are you still not dealing with the situation? What problems does this response cause for your child? For your teen? And what problems does it cause for you? or maybe even your relationship if you have a partner. And you see a lot, oh, I didn't mention this, but in a lot of families, you'll see two parents, one on each side of that spectrum. A disengaged parent and an over-involved parent. You see that a lot. Okay.
Meg, can I say, somebody's
Yeah.
asked if we could hear an example of what the responsive collaborator response to situations would look like. An example of that.
So the responsive collaborator would be a parent that would target an executive function skill and put a plan in place to support their child to develop that skill, which I will, when I talk about each of the executive functions, I'll give folks some ideas on how to do that. So what are executive functions? I'm assuming most of you are familiar, but if you're not, there's a couple definitions here. Processes that have to do with managing oneself in order to achieve a goal. These are neurologically based skills involving mental control and self-regulation. And then I kind of just summarized, basically they're the skills you need to get things done. And that's how you can define it with kids too. Okay. So these are the 11 I'm going to talk about. Flexibility, also called cognitive shift, task initiation, getting started on things, working memory. This is not short-term memory. Working memory is the ability to hold several things in your mind at once and then apply them. So, math, math problems, sometimes you need to hold several things at a time. So if a child can do that, with skill, then we know they have optimal working memory. But even something like giving your child 4-step direction, if the first step gets done and nothing else gets done, that can be a working memory deficit. Planning and prioritization, just like it sounds. Organization, which I think of it more as like physical organization or digital organization. Time management, which really most of it's around estimating time. That's where the delays are. Sustained attention. Inhibition, which is impulse control. Self-monitoring, that's kind of that metacognition, that being reflective. Emotional control or emotional regulation, which the last several years, everybody, for the most part, everyone's emotional regulation has been tested, and kids especially, because there's just been so much unpredictability and stress. And then goal-directed persistence, and this is the ability to set a goal and work towards it in a kind of methodical and committed way, which is really challenging. So I assume there's some folks here who have children with ADHD diagnoses. If you do, the things, so Russell Barkley, kind of the grandfather of ADHD research, he would say that ADHD should be called executive function disorder or self-regulation disorder, because you can't regulate if you don't have these skills, or you can't do it well. And everybody with ADHD struggles with some of these skills, if not most of them, especially the time management. That being said, there are certainly people, particularly like inattentive ADHD, which is one of the presentations. They may not struggle with impulse control. They may not, or inhibition, they may not struggle with, I'm trying to think of emotional control. That might not be an issue for someone with inattentive, but they have the attention challenges. They might have the task initiation, oftentimes the planning challenges, time management, etc. The other thing, and we'll talk about this, other diagnoses like autism or OCD, you may see more struggle with shift, or is it flexibility, cognitive flexibility. But some kids with ADHD, even the impulsive type, can be quite flexible. So it really does kind of depend on your child's individual profile. Okay.
Meg, we have a question about that last slide.
Yep.
Are those types of executive functions, do they correlate with the examples that you started out with in the first or second slide? They do. Okay.
They sure do. Yep.
Somebody has a good memory to ask that question.
Yeah, good working memory, right?
Good working memory there.
And those will come back. Those symptoms or behaviors that would indicate executive function delay, they're going to come back in the slides. So just bear with me. So there's two diagrams here. The one on the right is the brain, human brain. Prefrontal lobe is in blue. The brain develops from back to front. So this prefrontal lobe is not fully developed to at least 25, and in someone with ADHD or autism, probably closer to 28, 29. So that's when I said before that parenting these kids is marathon parenting. It really is, because I hear parents say, when they turned 25, it was like a light switch. Like all of a sudden they were, were demonstrating a lot of these skills that they hadn't seen, and they worried that would never develop. But you gotta stick with them for that long of a time if you can. So the diagram on and I forgot to mention, so the executive functions are kind of housed in the blue part of the brain, the prefrontal lobe. And they're very complex. It's not as simple as though they just happen right there in the front of the brain. It's more of a system in there, but most of those skills are kind of considered to be housed there. And the reason we know this is because when we look at TBI victims or patients, or stroke, or head trauma, any kind of or dementia, when the prefrontal lobe is impacted, those individuals struggle with these functions, with these skills. So you'll have someone who has traumatic brain injury, and then suddenly their working memory is not what it had been, or they struggle with organization or paying attention, emotional regulation. A lot happens in that frontal lobe, and a lot that's necessary to function in school, but also in relationships, and occupationally, socially. So it's incredibly important part of the brain. Also, another reason to be well, educated around concussion, risk of concussion, and how that can impact kids in sports. Always wear a helmet. The diagram on the left side is, you can see it's like the development of executive functions over time. However, it's typical. This is typical development. So, what's written here applies for a neurotypical kid. So in order to think about this with a child with executive function delays or ADHD or autism, you would want to add about 2 or 3 years. So where it says things like impulsivity and distractibility decreases around age 10, I would say look for that closer to around age 12 or 13, even if your child has ADHD. I know that's hard to read on this slide, but I think it's really interesting that the peak planning ability is between 18 and 20 for a neurotypical child. Yet we ask kids at age 17 to plan out the rest of their life with their college choices. And so, I'm a big believer in gap years and going out and trying out different jobs, doing some career exploration before college, especially for kids with ADHD, because you're asking them to try and figure out what they want to do and plan ahead when that part of their brain isn't really fully developed. So, 22, 23 is probably closer to when they can really think about things in the long term and have good planning skills or adequate planning skills, but yet that's the age a lot of kids have already graduated from college. So, it doesn't work for everybody, and sometimes kids are motivated to go to college, but I think if they get out of college at age 23 and their entire career ideas change, I wouldn't be surprised by that. That might be even an expectation that they might change their mind as their mind develops. All right, any questions on this slide? No, okay.
Good.
Okay, so executive function factors and assessment. So if you were to get your child evaluated either through school or through a private neuropsych evaluation, and some of this could be done with you, right, Dr. Short, like
Yes.
with pediatrician?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I would start with us.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, start with your pediatrician. School will look at some of this. Obviously, if they're struggling with executive functions, that's going to impact school. So there are various factors that contribute. We talked already about ADHD and ASD, traumatic brain injury, learning differences like dyslexia, dyscalculia. Those often go along with executive function delays. Stress, anxiety, PTSD. The stress and anxiety would be temporary deficits. So generally speaking, when the stress and anxiety is dissipates or is treated, you would see some of the executive functioning coming back. But certainly when children are under acute stress, or anyone, an adult too, they're not going to be able to, follow through on tasks or plan or organize. It's just too much. And we saw a lot of this during COVID, which is why I got so many inquiries for adult coaching. I think during that time was everyone was stressed and not getting much done. Depression, mood. I also added premenstrual dysphoria because there's a few different researchers looking at this, but looking at hormones and how they impact executive functions. And so if you have a child that, has premenstrual symptoms, I should say, that are significant, you may see during those times that they have some of these deficits more than other times. Unless they also have ADHD and ASD, then you would see that pretty much consistently. Illness is another one. There's been so much illness that this winter, this fall, that certainly if kids aren't feeling well, they're not going to feel like being able to pay attention to things. Sleep deprivation, that's a big one for adolescents. Substance use obviously impacts executive functions. In fact, for some people, that's the first sign of substance use, is they notice that their child isn't following through. They're suddenly, their bedrooms are messy. They're just not, performing like they had been. And then the environment, the situation that the child is in can exacerbate executive function challenges. So this could be a classroom. This could be a teacher that isn't supportive or educated on how to work with these kids, or who is, impatient. It could be a home. It could be going through a divorce, and the child then, is struggling with some of these skills. That would kind of be situation and stress at the same time. Okay, so the assessment. So there's a variety of ways that we would assess. Obviously, if we already know they have ADHD, we're gonna, we'll know that there's some executive function delays. But other things that a doctor or psychologist might look at are, surveys, parent-teacher surveys, and for adolescents, there's student surveys or child surveys that they can fill out, as well as interviewing, talking to the family, looking at family history, looking at kind of patterns. When did these behaviors start, challenges start? The brief is an assessment that's often used. This executive skills questionnaire, you probably don't use that one, do you, Dr. Schwab? Yeah, that's
No, I'm not
more,
familiar.
that one is Peg Dawson's. Dr. Peg Dawson, she's a school psychologist, and so a lot of teachers or schools use that one. It's a little more informal, but it is psychometrically sound. And then the BDEFs, that is Barclay's Deficit and Executive Function Scale for children and adolescents. I'm like going through the letters. And then the DCAFs, that's a Dennis Kaplan Executive Function Scale. So those would be the ones that would focus on executive functions. And then the WISC and the BASC are to kind of rule out other psychological or mental health challenge. I mean, it does a lot of things. The WISC and the BASC do a lot, but we would want to be looking at, some of these other factors that could be playing into this. Again, because if it's acute stress or temporary, depression or sleep deprivation or something like that, then we know that once the child kind of gets through that time, that they should regain use of their skills. Okay, so the foundational skills, just looking at our time. All right, so these develop between 6 months to age 12. So inhibition is that first one, and you'll see in italics, I have listed the behavior from the very beginning that matches this executive function. So inhibition, interrupting others, acting without thinking. So this is the ability to control one's impulses, pause and think before acting, making responsible or healthy choices, particularly adolescents. So, so things like when they're younger, playing games like red light, green light, or playing with them, stop or wait. So if you're, musical chairs where all of a sudden they have to stop when the music stops, games like that kind of help them to practice inhibition. Certainly, you can structure this more for kids in schools that might be physically impulsive. You might have a behavior chart. You could do it at home too, if they're physically impulsive or verbally impulsive, even with family members, you could do the same at home. So yeah, inhibition is a tough one. It does tend to get better with time, but it's one that is not tolerated very well in schools and can be incredibly stressful for families, whether it's verbally impulsive or physically impulsive. But when they're little, this is the reason kids with ADHD often get kicked out of preschool for things like this. So anything you can do to work with your child around setting limits, like basically setting up the guardrails for them, they really need that. And I've seen kids' stress levels decrease, little kids, their stress levels decrease once there's structure in place by the parent, because it's actually pretty unsettling to not have impulse control. And so once the parent kind of, creates a system, sometimes using incentives or just clearer consequences, sometimes you can see their stress levels decrease because now they feel like somebody is going to hold them accountable and they don't feel so out of control.
Meg, somebody's
Yep.
asking, so if this age group means that we should not really expect somebody who has ADHD or executive functioning delays to achieve those abilities until 2 to 3 years later, then we're talking about 14 or 15 as opposed to 12.
Well, I kind of added in that for these skills, I added the time in. So in other words, for neurotypical kids, they would develop, inhibition, or sorry, my timer's going off. They would develop these skills probably closer to age 9. So I added in 3 extra years.
Okay.
So 12 would be more typical for a child with ADHD to starting to have these skills if they've been supported with them.
And I guess and a follow-up question is, and I'm not sure I understand this, what would structure look like for a 13-year-old?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but basically, the short answer is work before play. So if they're impulsively going online, impulsively texting their friends, I don't know what they're doing at 13, then you would want to put some parameters around that. So I don't know if that helped, but we will talk a little bit more about that at the end.
Okay.
Working memory, this associates with the losing stuff, forgetting things, ability to hold information in one's mind while performing tasks. So supports that parents can provide here would be things like checklists and reminders, and they might be verbal reminders, or they might be, you heard my alarm go off before, alarms, notifications if they have a phone, just various ways to essentially remind them. And it's important to create routines, because routines are what, develop into, develop eventually into habits. So you need to help kids understand, or, be able to see visually, what the routine is. And if they have those routines visually, usually, for most kids, visual is better. Then over time, practicing day after day after day, going through those routines in the sequence, they'll eventually, it'll be a habit, and they'll start to do it on their own without having to look at them so much. But the more you can structure this and provide lists, the better. Emotional control, and this one, although it's, I would say this one, although they might have better emotional control at age 12, then you have hormones that kind of disrupt it again. So I'm not sure I would stick to that age for this one. It does develop, obviously from a 5-year-old having a tantrum. Hopefully they're not doing that at age 9, but then you can have big emotions that happen at age 11, 10, or, 12, but that I think is more hormonally connected. Or they're frustrated because they have these delays and they don't know what to do about it. And so what can you do with this? Okay, so this is, using mindfulness, breathing techniques. There's this book, Sitting Still Like a Frog. Some of you might be familiar with this. Mindfulness exercises for kids. Having your coping skills menu. That's something I work with kids a lot. Like, what are the, you may not scream profanities at your little brother. So you have, we've developed this coping skills menu. What are the things that you can rely on that help you, whether it's cuddling a pet, whether it's separating yourself from the room, whether it's deep pressure. There's all different things. So every kid's going to have a different coping skills menu, and these are things they've tried, maybe at school, maybe at home, but they're things they can go to. And it's not an option, when a child is, especially if they're angry or they're lashing out, it's not an option. They need to go to their coping skills menu and choose one of those coping skills. And like I said, sometimes they do have to be removed. If they, if they're emotionally distracted, you see this a lot with preteens and teens. They can't even focus because their emotions are so overwhelming and they can't get their work done. And a lot of this is tied into social media sometimes and the drama that happens there. You have to have ways to help them kind of downregulate from the emotional turmoil that's going on inside. So that might be talking to a friend, talking to a parent, maybe it's listening to music, maybe it's taking a hot shower. So these would all be things on your coping skills menu. But as a parent, you have to step in and say, this has gone too far. you now need to choose one of those things to calm down. And sometimes when they're little, it might be you, they need you to calm down. And so you have to calm yourself down as a parent and sit with them if that's what, if that's what works. This is more with like younger kids. Sometimes it's physical touch, but figuring out what works for your child. Okay, flexibility shift. So this is the one I mentioned, kids with autism or OCD or sometimes ODD. This is a tough one for them. They really struggle with this, adapting to unexpected events. So with these kids, you want to have a plan B, and you want to think ahead. You have to think ahead. So try not to give too many surprises. If you think something might be disappointing, like you find out that a birthday party's been canceled, if you can let them know like 2 days in advance, let them have their tantrum, their big emotional outburst, perhaps around this first, so that because then you have 2 days to kind of process it with them. So you're going to want to ask questions like, what are some other options? What is our plan B? When they're rigid they can be very rigid around a problem, like there's only one way to solve it. And so then your job as a parent is to come in with that question is like, that's one way. I'm wondering if we can think of another way, or doing things like, well, what if this happens? Then what will we do? And that's just, just kind of really preparing for things that might be unexpected. And then as far as like, if this was one of your goals with your kids, and this was the goal you want to work on, you might, have a reward or some system in place where when they shift elegantly, they shift with grace at a time that you had thought they would be triggered. That's when you want to reward that behavior, and then ask them, reflect on that and say, wow, I noticed like, in a year ago, you might have been really upset by that event, but this time you just kind of let it roll off your shoulder. Like, how did you do that? And that, what skills did you use? Or, how did you access that? Or what helped? You want to always kind of reflect what helped. And similarly, what's getting in the way. So you could do that with either if they're struggling, you say what's getting in the way. And then if they're succeeding, you say, oh, tell me about that. Why did that work so well for you this time? Sustained attention.
Meg, we have a couple questions about some practical applications here.
Yep.
Let me just, what do you do when your kid refuses to use anything from their coping skills menu? And then another one says when they can't down-regulate to make a choice about coping.
They can't down-regulate to make a choice. Well, I
think
mean,
they're overstimulated,
they're
dysregulated.
Right. Yeah, they're flooded. So in that case, I mean, you do have to give it some time. You have to, you should expect it can take as much as 30 minutes for them to kind of calm down and just kind of ride that wave calmly, patiently, knowing it's going to happen. That could be a goal that you structure. So when I say that term, a goal that you structure, I'm basically thinking like a behavior plan, right? So you could time that. So the last time you got upset, it took you 23 minutes to calm down. Let's see if we can get that down to like 17 minutes. And what might help. And I would say if they're not using a strategy in their coping menu, the menu needs to be revamped. You have to be willing to explore something else that might help. And as they as they grow and get older, there are going to be different things. It could be, and like, people may not want to hear this. It could be screen time. It could be video games. Those could be things that are regulating. You have to kind of, leverage that a little bit and think carefully how you do that, because it can also be distracting. But, I've known kids, mostly adolescents, where playing a video game for 30 minutes is incredibly regulating when they're upset. And then you can talk to them after the game is over. Okay, attention. Attending to a boring task. Yeah, this is tough. Focusing on a task in the time provided, blocking out, ignoring distractions. Okay. So you can help children ignore distractions. It's just like it sounds, right? So when you do homework, you don't have your phone with you, or on iPhones, there's the focus feature. You can block out social media, you can block out certain websites while they do homework. You can set timers. You're gonna focus for 25 minutes, then take a break, or if they can handle 25 minutes, that might be too much for someone who's young. So maybe it's 10 minutes and then they take a 5-minute break. So using timers for that, there's Pomodoro timers, is 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, but you can adjust those times as needed. Getting them to do a boring task, that's tough. That's tough when you have ADHD. So sometimes you have to provide an incentive. Fun follows work, right? Play after work. So really amp up, the excitement around what they get to do when they're done doing this work. Chores before play, that kind of thing, and just holding them accountable to that. And also shorter kind of, you can break a big, long, boring chore into 10-minute increments so that it's more tolerable. Oh, and also giving them choice too, that can help. If you say, well, you can do this or this, or, you can do it now, or you can do it in the afternoon, it's your choice. Task initiation, starting tasks independently. For this one, I think that a good strategy is to ask your child, when do you plan to do it? So here's this thing you have to do. What's your plan? What time do you, I have this is like a broken record for my son. So what time do you plan to start? How long do you think it's going to take? And then we, sometimes we'll set an alarm, or, he'll set a reminder, like at 7 p.m. he starts his homework. And then the alarm goes off. And then if it's like 7:15, I'll be like, wait a minute, your plan was to start at 7 and it's 7:15. So that, that's going to eat into your leisure time now. You're going to have to add another 15 minutes now because so just kind of you have to be there. You can't let them do this on their own. You have to kind of like come back in the room and be like, well, you said 7, and, hold them accountable to it. And this also could be something you structure. You could say every day you start your homework at 7 or at 5, or every day that you start your chores at 4 p.m., you get a star, after 10 stars, you get a special, dessert or something. Okay, advanced skills. I'm going to kind of go through these faster because I'm looking at the time. Speaking of time management. These are skills that will start to develop in middle school. I was a middle school teacher. I think that's why I got into coaching, is because I felt like my entire job was trying to teach and train middle school students to develop these skills, because you cannot do well in high school, certainly without these skills. Okay, planning, prioritization, determining what's most important. That's a hard one for kids and adults with ADHD. But basically your tools here are going to be calendars and planners, and now phones are a big part of this. Chunking big tasks or long projects into smaller due dates, and teachers are much better about this than 15, 20 years ago. I felt like I was the only one doing this when, I guess that would have been 15 years ago. But giving like every 3 days, giving a different part of the project that's due, and really breaking it up into smaller tasks. That is going to be far more successful for these kids because it's less overwhelming, it's more explicit and clear. These kids do not do well with instructions like, do a research project on some topic and it's due in 2 months. That's like a disaster. They can't handle that. And vagueness is also a pet peeve of mine. Teachers that are vague. These kids don't understand vague. You need to be very specific, very, exact. And part of the reason is sometimes these kids they're so creative and they have such wild ideas sometimes that if a teacher doesn't say exactly what they want, they're going to get something that could be really off target. So you have to be very clear. Organization, this is pretty self-explanatory, but backpacks, Chromebooks, bedrooms, pick your battles with this, right? Like, I know a lot of parent clients of mine, at this point, they're just closing the bedroom door. It's like, that's not going to be their battle. But as far as helping kids develop the skill, just pick something small to start. It could be, we're going to work on organizing just the surface of your desk, like just the surface. We're not even going to look at drawers or one shelf in your closet, but we're not doing the whole closet. Give them a time limit to do it. Something you might start them off, but then it's called fading the prompt. You kind of pull back and start with them for the first 5 minutes, and then like, oh, I think I have a phone call, or I got to respond to an email. I'll be right back. And then, that gets them started. You can also create lists and routines with this too. If that's, like for emptying lunch boxes, that can be part of your after school routine, and having them, put everything where it needs to go. For teenagers, for anyone really, but I highly recommend, if you have a landing pad in your house, this is where backpacks and keys and phones and like a charging station, and having it all in one spot. It's just going to save everybody a lot of hassle, and it'll actually help the child become more organized, because everything will go into that room or that location. And so over time it trains them, and that becomes a habit as opposed to something that requires a lot of cognitive energy. Time management. The big struggle here is with estimating how long things will take. Kids with this executive function delay really struggle. They tend to really underestimate. So I would say multiply by 3 how long you think it's going to take. The kid's like, oh, this math homework will take 10 minutes. Nope, give yourself, block out 30 minutes. After maybe, 3 weeks of diligently estimating time, then you can pull back and just estimate, just double it. Just then, a 15-minute task, give yourself 30 minutes. But when you're first starting out with this, especially if they're in middle school, triple it. They're going to get distracted. It's going to take them longer. There's going to be, something that they forgot to do. They have to go get a pencil. Oh, now they got to sharpen the pencil. Oh, it broke. They have to get another one. So it's going to take longer than they think it will. Clocks, timers, alarms, these are all helpful. Planners, routines for like getting ready in the morning, will all help with time. Goal-directed persistence. This is a tough one with adolescents, because they're so pure motivated. They're so socially motivated. And these long-term goals like college or career seem like forever away. So you have to ask them questions. So one of my favorite questions is what you're doing now at this moment connected to one of your longer term goals? Or another way to ask that is, how is what you're doing now connected to one of your larger or longer term goals? Like, is it related? I'm not sure. If they're like, no, I'm having fun with my friends, well, maybe one of their long-term goals is to maintain these friendships. That's fine, but you have to constantly kind of be like reminding them of those longer term goals. And this one, I've seen, I have clients, this does not develop sometimes until at like 22. Like, this is one that can take some time. I know it's very frustrating for parents, but it's a little, it seems like it's far away. And sometimes there's avoidance of growing up, and those other kinds of things come into play. Metacognition, so checklists, like self-evaluation checklists. So editing checklists would be a concrete example for school, but these could also be checklists around, like college application essay. Did you do all the things? Did you remember to do this and this? And that might be provided for them, but getting them to do it as well. And this could be like, I've known clients where they had they had acne, and they had like a face cleansing kind of routine. And so at the end of the night, they'd say, did I do the toner? Did I do the scrub? Did I do all these things? And it was just a way to like check, like if that they did these things. But when we really mean with metacognition is like asking, what did I do last time? Was it helpful? Was it harmful? Was it enough? Like with tests, this is a good opportunity to look at metacognition. So last time I got an F on the test, well, what did you do? How did you study? How did you prepare? What could you do differently this time? And leave, really, and then they could tell you what their plan is. And then you say, do you think that's going to be enough? Do you think that'll make the difference? Not telling them how to do it, but asking them, what's your plan? How are you going to use what happened before and let that inform you as you go forward, learning from your mistakes? Okay, so these are the steps, right? This is how you do it. I try to break it down really simple. And this is, I have to, give Peg Dawson credit because this is from her book, kind of changed it a little bit, but it's basically the same. So identify the skill you want to work on. And that could be from doing an assessment, like you have an assessment, or maybe you just know. I mean, you're the parents, these, you've been living with these kids, like So you could be like, we really got to work on time management. That's my kids, number one issue. So that's your problem you're choosing. Choose one at a time. I had a client once had like 10 different executive functions to work on at once. It was 2 kids. So it was a lot. It was too much. So just pick one. And then you set your goal. What is your goal? It has to be realistic. If they're late 5 days a week to school, the goal should be 4 or 3 days a week to start. Okay, so small baby steps. Then you create your plan, you collaborate, you discuss it with your child. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Who's going to be involved? You post the plan if you can, or text it if it's a teenager. And then you try it out for a couple of weeks. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, try it out, and you measure. You have some way to measure it: number of days, number of times, number of frequency of behavior. This is all kind of behavior therapy jargon, but there are different things you can measure. It's got to be objective though. And then after those 2 weeks, you look at it, and this is not like, oh, you failed, you didn't do it. This is, well, what worked about our plan and what didn't? Let's review it, and let's make some changes as needed. It's probably not going to be perfect after the first time, unless you're a behaviorist or a BCBA or something. Okay, tools and strategies. This I just kind of consolidated. I work with families and adults, and these are the tools that I would say, are the most helpful for folks. The daily check-ins. This would be for parent coaching. For accountability, for communication. There's a lot of reasons to do that. I know teenagers are often highly scheduled, but find some time. It could be 10 minutes a day, but just find some time to check in with them. And make sure that it's like you check in on the things they care about, right? Like, how are things socially? How are things academically? How are things at your job? How are things athletically? Whatever, musically, whatever they care about. The family meeting, I'm a big supporter of this. Once a week, everybody gets their planner, their calendars out, they sit down, figure out your schedules, who's going where, when. It's just a great tool for communication. It can reduce conflict and reduce misunderstandings, or cut down on people, mostly parents, hearing at the last minute they have to do something. And also, it's co-planning with your kids, so it's teaching them planning skills. Ask, don't tell. So this is one I use even with little kids, 6 or 7 year old. So what's your plan? How are you going to resolve that? What are you thinking? What might be a good way to do this? Don't lecture them. Don't tell them this is how it's going to be done. You can say, I have an idea. Here's my thought, or I was reading about this, or I heard from this other family that this worked really well. What do you think? But this is a conversation. This is a collaboration. It is not you in charge, because if you're in charge now, you're going to be in charge when they're 22. So you don't want that. Calendars and planners, visual routines, we talked about that, visual cues that can be post-it notes with reminders. And you can be the one to do it first, and then you withdraw I put it at the bottom, fade the prompt. You start out. So that's the I do, we do, you do model. At first, I'll do it with you, then we'll do it together, and then you're going to do it on your own. If anyone's a teacher here, I'm sure a lot of this is familiar. Whiteboards, I mean, lots of my clients use them. I personally don't have one in our house, but a lot of families like them for reminders or schedules or, you know, routines. Checklists, kind of similar. Timers, alarms, breaks. Don't forget the breaks, especially if they struggle with attention. Landing pad, I mentioned. Incentives and reward. Work first, fun later. And then scaffold, that's the, you know, modeling the skill first, and then fading the prompt. Fading the prompt is the best part, by the way, because then you get to watch them do it, and you know, you get to have more of your free time back. Tips to create calm. Number one, this is a parent workshop, self-care. You cannot parent these children if you do not get the support that you need. You can't do it well. You have to care for yourself. It's that whole oxygen mask metaphor, right? You have to find ways, find supports, find whatever it is you need to be as calm as you can be, knowing that the end of the day is always going to be hard, but doing the best you can. And also being self-compassionate with yourself. You're going to mess up, and that's okay too. And then you can talk about that with your kid. Model use of executive functions. When your kids are little, thinking out loud is a great one. You know, I'm going to put my clothes in the washer, then I'm going to add the soap, then I'm going to take them out, and just talking through it. That helps kids to internalize some of these routines. Parent the child you have, not your neighbor's kid, not the kid that you thought you'd have, not the child that you expected or that the school tells you you should have at this point. This is your kid, and they're going to develop on their own pace, and that's totally fine. Make those goals realistic. Support their natural abilities. All of these kids have strengths, superpowers even, and really support that and emphasize those, particularly with you know, ASD and ADHD. These kids have, you know, incredible abilities. So focus on those. Find supportive environments, find schools, find after-school activities, sports, peers and adults that get them, that support them, that don't judge them, that know that these are not, they're not intending these things, they're struggling. Okay, these are delays, they need help. Provide opportunities to practice the skills, provide those guardrails, hold them accountable, provide consequences, not punitive, but just like, okay, we agreed on this. This is what would happen if you didn't get this done. Praise their effort and their progress. Don't think about the A+ and the perfect scores. I mean, some of them are going to do that anyway, but just make sure that you're focusing on how hard they're working, because I guarantee you they're working harder than most neurotypical kids. Communicate, or connect and collaborate. Okay, so this is Dr. Ross Green. I'm a big fan of his work. He's, by the way, a lot of these researchers are in New England. Peg Dawson is in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Ross Green is in Portland, Maine, I believe. Yeah, I've got some people I like from Harvard. So these are all, you know, kind of New England folks. But anyway, yeah, kids do well if they can, right? If they're not doing well, there's something getting in the way. And this is true of adults. Adults do well if they can. So find out what those obstacles are. Be curious, be investigative, try and figure it out. And then figure out a strategy, a skill, a support, something that they need in order to be able to be successful, even if it's a teeny tiny step. Finding those ways to help them and celebrating those successes. Okay. So I pulled off, I didn't, well, Barkley, he's kind of always in my mind when I'm doing this work, but this book I like, Cooper, Kahn, and Dietzel. This is very digestible. And then if you really want to go deep dive, there's the Smart But Scattered, Peg Dawson. There's Smart But Scattered Kids and Smart But Scattered Teens. I wouldn't recommend Maggie Sibley's work unless you're a therapist. It's more for clinicians, but she's got some great webinars. And then resources. So I offer parent coaching and consulting, which is shorter term, kind of solution focused. Special ed advocacy work around 504s, IEPs, and ADHD. And then we have our parent support group, which is a wonderful resource. There's just incredible wisdom and knowledge and experience in that group. So I recommend that too.
Well, thank you very much, Meg. That was a lot of very helpful information. And we do have several questions that I stopped interrupting you so you can get through it. Let me just go through these if I can and see if we can do that in the remaining time. Somebody asked, what if the teen feels unable to come up with multiple solutions to problems? Is the solution to this open-ended request difficulty just to keep asking?
Can you read that second part again? Is the solution what?
And if Julie wants to maybe unmute, that's fine too, if you'd like to ask that question specifically.
Yeah, I would. So what I find with one of my kids that is very difficult is like, you ask the question, how are you going to get that done? How are you going to change this thing? How are you going to solve that problem? And his response, he says, I don't know. He doesn't think, it's like a couple of things together. One is the difficulty with open-ended questions, and the other is like not self-evaluating. So they're kind of pinging off each other, and
yep.
So I was just trying to figure out.
So my approach with that would be, say, here's what I'm noticing. I'm noticing you're struggling with A, B, and C, or I'm noticing these things are happening. Other people have noticed, maybe teachers, maybe other friends, even peers have noticed this thing. What are your thoughts on that? And if he doesn't, or they, I don't know, he, she, they, doesn't have a solution, you can offer up ideas. I'm not totally sure in the particulars, you may also have to say, you need to choose one of these ideas to try. Like, you can't leave them with an out of, I don't know, and therefore nothing happens. If it's an act, if it's a problem. So you need to choose one of these ideas I'm offering, or you need to find your own. But we have a problem and we need to figure out how to solve it together.
I think the problem ends up being that he continually says, I don't know. You know what I mean?
He could, he said, well, then if you just have to say, like, if you can't make a choice, like, it's kind of a non-negotiable, like you have to choose something, or maybe there's,
ways. It's, to a certain extent it is, but like, I'm a little concerned about not getting away from the scaffolding at all. So, like, for instance, I think that he's unwilling to make the effort in a fear of failure kind of thing. So instead of coming up with an answer that he's like, oh, she's going to say that's wrong, or she's going to come up with her own idea, he waits until somebody gives him an idea, and so he never comes up with his own. And that's,
so
to me,
he's going to need, so that's a skill he has to develop, is kind of having his own thoughts and opinions on something and try, like, so you may not, it's hard because I don't know the particulars, but you have to let him choose, you know, like you can offer ideas, but even him choosing is a little bit more independence than being told. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it could also be, I mean, it could be avoidance. It could be a lot of things. There could, you know, be social, you know, anxiety. Often you'll get, I don't know, or overwhelm or stress. Oh, you know, these things can cause that response. So that might have to be addressed.
Yeah, thank you.
Somebody is asking about dysregulation. I'm assuming this is maybe a younger kid. What happens if kids are still dysregulated even after screen time or video games, and they go right back into the fits? And that could be true with ADHD kids or not. I think it's not
Dysregulated how? Sorry.
Shannon, do you want to unmute and say that? We have a few more minutes. I know that we're running against the time clock, but Shannon, are you available? You want to?
Yeah, we're available here. The issue we run into is we may have like the fits right away, you know, disarray, a little bit of chaos, and then there's screen time. And sometimes we may like put in some responsibilities before screen time, but when the screen time hits, the chaos stops. And after, you know, maybe a half hour, we might say, let's give it a break. And then the chaos starts right back up.
So he's earning, is it your son?
She.
Okay.
Yeah.
They. So they're earning screen time. Is that right?
We generally have responsibilities before the screen time.
Okay. And then they don't want to turn it off, or they.
Right. Correct. They don't want to turn it off.
Yeah. So then that becomes okay. So then the behavior is the problem is every time we go to turn your screen off, you have a fit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem. So in order for you to continue having screen time, it needs to look a certain way when it's over. And you might have to model that, or, you know, so this is how it has to look. If you're having trouble with that, we need to talk about that. Maybe there's something you could do. You know, maybe they need a 10-minute warning. Maybe they need, you know, I don't know, like you have to have that conversation. If they, and I would measure this, I would look at the days that they have screen time. These are the days you had a fit. These are the, and your goal is, if they're having 5 fits in 5 days, again, your goal might be 3 fits in 5 days. And then gradually 2 fits and 1 fit, right? Small steps.
And at what moment would you bring in that goal to the individual? Like how far away, because during the event, like screen time, they're going to pay attention. Afterwards, they're going to have a fit. How far away from the event would you bring this up to them? Would it be after they do their responsibilities and then say, before we start, these are the new parameters, these are the new rules? Or
this is, yeah, so you would never bring this up right before.
Okay.
This would be like, hey, so what's your child's name?
Well, we have a couple different age groups.
Oh, okay. Okay, so
maybe we would do this at family time, like during a family meeting.
That's a great time to do it. So, hey, we're going to start something new this week. We're going to try it out. It's an experiment. We're going to try this out, and it's going into effect tomorrow. So you want to give them a heads up that it's happening. You might even give them a day or 2 heads up, and let them chime in. You know, they definitely get to say something. They get to have an opinion about this, you know, or maybe an idea. I mean, if they say, I don't want to do it, well, that's not really, you know, you can just say, what we're currently doing is not working. So we need to figure out something that will work better.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Meg, I'm mindful of the time, and we have a few more questions. Are you able to stay, or
I'm fine. Yeah, I can stay a few extra minutes. And I also just want to say too, that I do offer free parent consults. So if folks want to have set up a one-on-one time, they can, on my website, they can schedule a call.
I'm going to say there are 3 more questions that if people want to ask. One is very short. At what age is a child appropriate to be involved in family meeting?
Oh,
Would that-
I would, well, to
Go
see
ahead.
all of you now. I would say any age. The only thing is that, if you have little, like 6 and unders, your family meeting's probably only going to be 7 to 10 minutes. If they have ADHD and they're under 6, maybe 6 minutes if you're lucky. But definitely I would include them. I have an 8-year-old. She's part of our meetings. She doesn't contribute as much, but I think that's just the nature of who she is. But she listens. She listens.
Okay, well, I'm going to say thank you so much, Meg. I really appreciate this. And if you can stay on to answer a couple more specific questions, that would be great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I appreciate the conversation that you've had and your input. We do have, I'd like to put a plug in also for that, the valleyadhd.org website. I think it's really excellent. Meg has put that together. There are a lot of resources there for you. And if you do have other questions and you want to stay on, she can stay for, I think, a few more minutes. Is that right, Meg?
Yep, I'm good.
Great. Thank you all for joining us and have a lovely evening.